He made his way outside with wobbly legs and a fistful of leaflets, his veins twitchier than they'd been in months. Sometimes he could go days without thinking about junk, but others he could smell it, and the only remedy was a hit or a meeting. With neither of those an option, he settled for heading to the bus stop, waiting for a ride home so that he could lock himself indoors and blast some music until the monster simmered to a dull roar. I need a job. But his choices were as limited as his skills, and were narrowed further by the extensive criminal record that Searave had made a conscious decision to ignore. We can find you some work, Liam had said, but Jamie had refused. Leaving California meant leaving Searave. It had to, or he might as well have stayed put and taken up yoga. The rumble of the bus caught his attention. He glanced up and his heart sank a little. Despite a growing urge to get home, the thought of being stranded with his own company again seemed almost as bad as loitering outside a building that was stuffed full of mouth-watering opiates. You get kind of cranky when you're on your own too long. Cranky. Right, if only. Jamie scratched his arms in rhythmic sets of 4, like he had any hope of easing the disquieting itch in his veins. The one that no matter how far he ran, or how many bullshit meetings he showed up to, he could never entirely escape. Perhaps he was wasting his time, delaying the inevitable that only Liam's intervention had prevented last year. Matlock Bath was still a mystery to him, but there were junkies everywhere, and it wouldn't take long to sniff them out. And where there were junkies, there was junk. And fuck, if Jamie couldn't use a fat hit of... You've got to be shitting me. Jamie jumped a mile and spun around so fast he nearly gave himself whiplash. The gravelly voice was that of a stranger, and yet beautifully familiar all at the same time. But nothing on earth could have prepared him for the sight of the tall, rugged figure who stood behind him. An errant ray of sun made the man appear like a seraphic apparition, and Jamie could hardly believe his eyes. Mark? I guess so. Mark leaned heavily on his crutches, cursing that Jamie seemed doomed to cross his path in his worst possible moments. I feel like crap today, so I'm not altogether sure. Wasn't expecting to see you, though. What are the chances that you wind up at this shithole? Jamie laughed, though he seemed as stunned as Mark felt. This isn't the worst place I've ever been. Me neither. Do you live around here? I do now. Jesus. Mark had half convinced himself that Jamie had been a figment of his morphine-addled imagination, dreamed up by a subconscious that knew all too well that he could only function when his attention was fixed on someone else's problems. But here Jamie was, leaning on a bus stop outside Chesterfield Royal, clutching a leaflet on community care for drug and alcohol misuse. Mark pictured the scars lettering Jamie's slender forearms and joined the dots. He's a junkie. The realization should have sent him running, but it didn't. Who was Mark to judge when he'd spent all weekend fighting the urge to drink himself into oblivion? That he possessed the ability to resist was a gift, and he'd known plenty of men who didn't have it. He ventured a little closer to Jamie and took in pale skin and shadowed eyes that mirrored his own soul.